Hello and welcome to our session today. And today we'll be having a really interesting session about diversifying stories and dominant narratives and who is included in those dominant narratives and who is excluded out of those. I'm joined by three very exciting and amazing women who will be sharing their stories about how they counter dominant narratives and include marginal voices to those dominant narratives. I'm joined today by Rebecca Lansberry-Baker, who's joining from the United States. She works with the Native American Journalists Association. I'm also joined by Moky Makura, who is the Executive Director of Africa No Filter. She's in Johannesburg, South Africa. And I'm also joined by Kate Doak, who's a journalist based in Sydney, Australia. So I'll just give the floor over to them and they will start with some introductory remarks and we'll have a conversation from there onwards. So perhaps Rebecca, you could take the floor.
Be happy to. Thank you so much, Fungai. I am just really thrilled to be here amongst such a great group of women that are, representing their communities across the globe. So I'm, like you said, Rebecca Landsberry-Baker. I'm the executive director for the Native American Journalists Association, and we have about, I think around 750 or so members across the US and Canada mainly, and our members make up not only Indigenous people, but also non-Indigenous folks that are covering Indigenous communities throughout the U.S. and Canada as well. So we've been around since 1983, and our work is as relevant and important today as ever. And one of the buckets of work that we do is we kind of regulate and serve as a watchdog for mainstream media as they are reporting on Indigenous communities, and we provide resources for reporting on them ethically. But if there's ever a time that we need to call out our mainstream colleagues, we do that and make sure that there's a course correction there for making sure that they know how best to report. And we have a lot of resources in that, whether it's, the proper Indigenous terminology for the communities that you're covering, or expertly sourcing in Indigenous communities. Those are some of the ways that we are providing resources for mainstream, excuse me. And then another big part of our work is also providing support and resources for tribal media, and those are the outlets that are covering the around 574 federally recognized tribes within the United States spread out. And within that, even a smaller portion of our work even focuses on supporting free press in those Indigenous and tribal communities. And out of those 574, there are only a handful that have free press protections. So we provide templates and support for those communities that are operating under a free press or want to operate under a free press too. So, but I wear lots of hats within the organization, and I also serve on the editorial board for my tribe's newspaper, the Muskogee Nation News. And Muskogee Media is what the outlet is called. So I serve on their editorial board as well. But yeah, like I said, it's really a pleasure to be alongside so many amazing women, and I'm very excited to hear what's going on in other parts of the world as well.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Given us food for thought, which we will pick into later on. Now I'll move on to Moki. Um, uh, Take the floor, Moki.
So yeah, no, thanks for the introduction. I think first of all, congratulations to you guys for getting us all from such different time zones in one place. It's Australia, America, and Johannesburg here. So I think the topic for this session I think is really exciting because it's actually what Africa No Filter was set up to do, and I'm the executive director of that organization, and we're really about trying to shift harmful stereotypical narratives about the continent. Rebecca, you talked a lot about tribes. I mean, I think tribes are important, but Africa is not one tribe. We're 54 different countries, over 3,000 different languages. And I guess for the world to often just see Africa as one thing, and that one thing is often stereotypical, it's old-fashioned, it's about poverty, it's conflict. I mean, when you say Africa, in fact, there's a film called When I Say Africa, because they did, they did a whole thing at schools in America, and they said, when I say Africa, what do you think? And all the stuff the young kids came back with was really disheartening, just the way, the image, the perception about the continent. And that's really what we're trying to shift. So it's really about trying to make sure that Africans get to put their own voice in, because it's about us as Africans defining our own narrative rather than having our narrative defined for us. And unfortunately, the way the world works, the way the news cycle works, is that a lot of the news cycle tends to be event driven. It's elections, it's a war, it's a conflict, there's something that happens that causes the news to cover it. And often a lot of that news tends to feed that stereotype. And certainly the news agencies who dominate, we've actually done research that shows that a lot of the newsrooms on the continent, they get their news from the international news agencies because they don't have correspondents in other African countries, because, like the rest of the world, most media outlets are very cash strapped. And if you want to cover the continent and you're sitting in Nigeria, you're going to have people in 54 other countries, or 53 other countries. So it's a tough thing. So they're deeply reliant on the Reuters, AFP, BBC, and a lot of those have a different agenda. They're covering the world. So they're not waiting for the nice stories. They're actually just putting out the news events, and they tend to be the ones that feed that stereotype. And actually, research that we did showed that it was, organizations like BBC, AFP, that often tend to lead and drive those narratives. And it's not deliberate necessarily. Maybe it is in some cases, but it's not a deliberate, it's the way it is. So as Africans, we've got to take back that space. And increasingly, some of the time when I look at, like CNNs and BBC, the BBC has 300 journalists working in East Africa. It's the biggest news media outlet on the continent, and it's British. And we're deeply reliant on it, but they seem to cover because they have the money, because finding these alternative stories, and I call them alternative because they're just not the norm, it requires money, it requires effort, and a lot of news outlets on the continent just don't have that. So they just grab the first thing they can find, which is those other stories. And the last thing I will say is that, there's a lot to be said for the stories about Africa. And I'm by no means saying that there isn't poverty on the continent, there isn't conflict. I mean, look at what's just happened with the Ugandan elections. A lot of things we do feed that narrative, but there's a way to tell the story. So do you tell a story about the Ugandan elections and you write about Museveni, which is typically how it gets written? You write about Museveni. What about writing about Bobby Wine, the young activist who proved that Africans do have agency, which is one of the narratives that we often get. Africans have no agency, they're a bit dependent, and we need to help them. So I think there's a lot more to be said for how you tell those stories, because nobody's saying don't tell them, just tell them in a way that feeds a different narrative. So let me stop there.
Thank you so much, Moky. We'll move on now to Kate for final remarks, and then we'll open up our panel.
Wow, thank you so much, Fungai and Moky and Rebecca, and also to frayintermedia for inviting me to this panel. Wow, three amazing women to do this panel with. I'm literally blown away by each and every one of your stories. So for me personally, it is an honor to be with you today. I'd like to start by saying that I'm currently located in Sydney, which is on the lands of the Gadigal people of Eora Nation here in Australia. So I'd also like to pay my respects to elders past and present and emerging amongst Australians Indigenous peoples as well. So yeah, I work with Channel 10, specifically 10 News First, which is a part of Viacom CBS, Australia and New Zealand. We're one of the larger broadcasters here in Australia. We're one of the big 5 national broadcasters. So we predominantly focus on television. We do have like some pay TV assets and a few other different like resources from our parent organization, which is Viacom CBS as well. We're currently in the process of developing a reconciliation action plan, which specifically focuses on Indigenous people across all of Australia, and ensuring that like not only are we telling their stories correctly, but we're representing them to the greatest extent that we possibly can, that we're also continuously challenging ourselves to learn as well. So that's one of the things that we're focusing on quite heavily at the moment. We're also focusing on diversity across the board. In regards to LGBTI people, in regards to people from different racial and ethnic and religious backgrounds as well. And we're presently in the process of merging our various different plans, because 10 only joined the Viacom CBS family a couple of years ago. And we've also had the merger of Viacom CBS both internationally and also within Australia over the course of the past 12 months as well. So we're currently in the process of merging all of our different plans together so that we can give the greatest level of representation possible to all the demographics within our listening audience, not just the demographics which are predominant. So, as I said, 10's one of the largest broadcasters here in Australia. However, we focus on the intricacies of each of our demographics as well, so that like people feel welcome. Like when they walk into the door, if they're doing a tour at Channel 10 in Sydney, for example, or if they're working in any way, shape or form with our organisation, they feel as if they're welcome. They feel as if they're part of the team no matter what. And that's one of the key things for us as well. Internationally, Viacom CBS has also, in the past few months, ensured that like diversity is a key part of our business no matter what. So with that, we also have different policies in place, meaning that any organisation that we work with has got to have diversity and inclusion related policies in place. Otherwise, we will choose not to work with them. So diversity and inclusion is a key part of our business, and it's not just business, it's what we do. Like it's something that with every organization worldwide, we've got to focus on.
Thank you so much, Kate, for those remarks. And now I'll just open up with a thought or a kind of look back at a year that we will all remember as a very momentous year, which is 2020, which brought with it new challenges, but also exacerbated pre-existing structural issues that society hasn't quite dealt with and is still continuing to deal with. And I'll focus on 2 main aspects of that. Firstly, COVID. Obviously, we are all struggling with this across the world, and we are seeing that, now that we have this vaccine, there are people who are going to have access to it much quicker than other people. There are new divisions that are coming up. by location, by race, by class, by all kinds of different markers within society. So my first question would be how your networks are dealing with the COVID pandemic and how you are shedding light on counter narratives or narratives that are not so much in the dominant space, because it is people who are the most marginal who are most affected by this pandemic. And so how you are working to ensure that those voices are heard and included within the narrative around the pandemic. I'll start with that question and then I'll go on to the next part of it. Anyone can go ahead.
Okay, I'll go first with that. So the vaccines that are presently in development globally have been of extreme interest to Channel 10, most obviously, and also with a lot of our different counterparts across the Australian media landscape as well. So it's basically been front and center. Australia is actually one of the countries which has the capability to produce vaccines. We've had multiple different candidate vaccines which we've been developing here over the course of the past year now, with University of Queensland, and we also have the vaccine development company CSL as well, which was initially an Australian government department which was formed back around 1919 during the influenza pandemic that occurred nearly 100 years ago as well. So vaccines have been front and center of Australia's thoughts since this pandemic started. In relation to how we cover it, we've been constantly challenging our various different political leaders to focus not just on Australia, because that would be the easy way out. However, by focusing on the capability to supply the rest of the world, not just our own people, I think it's been a challenge for everyone, because if we don't focus on the world, and this is a truly global problem, it has an impact on our neighbors, it has an impact on the rights of women in particular, because throughout COVID, for example, there's been such a massive drop globally in relation to access to education, access to safe water, access to various other different resources and opportunities, which so many of us take for granted. So I think it's been eye-opening experience for everyone here, but I think that it also shows that when there is an issue that occurs globally, it's also a solution that we can come about with globally as well, and it can influence everyone. So if we can produce a vaccine as quickly as what we have here in Australia and also around other different parts of the world, it raises a question: why can't we do this with any other issue which is predominant globally as well, specifically women's rights, access to clean water, things that should be front and center no matter what. That it shouldn't take a pandemic for us to be thinking about.
Absolutely, absolutely. Any other remarks or thoughts on that, especially in terms of covering the narratives of people who might not be talked about so much during this pandemic, who are highly affected by the outcomes of what's going on this global scale?
Yeah,
Rebecca, maybe you should I don't know, maybe Rebecca, you can take that and then I'll answer after.
yeah, happy to do that. So I think for us, we have data that we collected a few years ago that supports the idea that our tribal members and communities across the U.S. especially, when it comes to media, they trust tribal media for, the important stories, and that includes health. And I think, when it comes to the pandemic, if you compare, what the mainstream is doing in their coverage, they're not getting nitty gritty into the tribal breakdown of what the numbers are, in the Navajo Nation or the Muscogee Creek Nation, or, it's not at that granular level. But when we look at tribal media, that's the stories and the coverage that they are doing, and that's what's most important to them. And then when you look at the breakout of the distribution even of the vaccine, and that's done on the state level, and compare that to how the tribes are rolling out that. And I'm from Oklahoma, so I always look at kind of Oklahoma as an example, and there are 39 federally recognized tribal nations within the state of Oklahoma, for instance. And if you look at the state's rollout of the vaccine, and then compare that to what the tribes are doing for their own people, when they are able to have that and exercise that sovereignty about how they are rolling out the vaccines, you see them prioritizing in a way that, mainstream or, the broader state government in Oklahoma is not doing. So they are prioritizing, not only elders, but the citizens that are proficient in the language, so fluent speakers, and to try to preserve, that culture. So if you're looking at it even from a health perspective, and then from, a coverage perspective too, there are just always going to be, approaches within the tribe, whether that's in media or, within healthcare, that you're going to be prioritizing those tribal citizens at that level, and they just do a better job because they're more familiar with those communities. And so it's the same thing with tribal media, and the stories that they're covering may not necessarily be picked up by the mainstream papers or outlets that are in that community. But one of the things that NAJA, when we were looking at how we can support our members, and because they have been hit so hard here in the US, the tribal communities with the pandemic, like everyone, but the numbers have just been really ravaged our native communities here. So one of the things that we wanted to do was, in lieu of course, of having an in-person annual conference, which is what we normally do, we decided to change our strategy, and we are now doing monthly webinars that are free of cost to anyone who wants to join, to how to better cover COVID-19 in Indian country, because the approaches are so different across the US too. That's geographically, it depends on what kind of infrastructure is there with healthcare, and again kind of varies like state to state. So we wanted to make sure that our members of NAJA had an opportunity to share their expertise with the rest of Indian country, and could, share their successes, share their challenges with each other throughout the year, versus, normally when we just have one conference a year, it's you come together one time. But we knew these challenges were going to be a long-term struggle, and we would need to pace those out. And so I think it's been a really, positive way for our members to still retain that support virtually, and share some of those challenges as they have grown, and they've pivoted, and we've tried to pivot with them for sure. So I'll say, in the US, that's what I think is really important in tribal media is, they're the ones that know their citizens, they know the stories, and they're the ones that are reporting on them better than anyone else could.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So,
yeah, just it's funny because quite recently, probably last week sometime, Bloomberg have got an Africa newsletter they send out. And the headline of the last story they did was this: Africa is falling behind in the race for vaccines. Is it poverty or in some cases incompetence? Okay, I'll just stop there because I was incensed to read that, because when you actually read the story, they refer to 3 or 4 countries, not all 54. It feeds the narrative, and there are other, and I don't think there's a single country, well, there probably is, that isn't facing some kind of issue with the rollout of vaccines, even America. So sort of trying to sort of make Africa own the problem and put it down to incompetence or poverty would just, it fed a narrative. And in fact, there was a story that went out in another newspaper that was actually much more measured, did the analysis of which countries are getting what. There are all kinds of initiatives. Yes, Africa is probably behind the curve because there's a lot more, you know, we have a lot of people that need to get it, who probably, our health systems are not as strong, and we know that. But there are lots of initiatives, like the African Union has come together. They are buying as a continent as opposed to buying as individual countries, and each country will get an allocation. So yes, it might go to, you know, each country will determine how it does it. So sort of blanket stories that just approach the issue as if it's just one big issue and it's just doom and gloom, just are the kind of things that we are, you know, fighting about. So that was one example. And like I said, we counted that, we sort of retweeted it, you know, I replied to it. And a lot of people like to see that somebody's looking out for these stories when they feel they're unfair, or they've just been written in a way that's very biased and just not well thought through. The headline inadvertently is often the problem, because whoever the copywriter is or the sub-editor is has just put a you know, massive headline to draw eyeballs in. It's got almost nothing to do with the story. But in this case, the story actually reflected the journalists had done little effort to go and actually see the progress that's being made on the continent. And again, I do want to be careful to say that this is not about trying to paint Africa in a you know, perfect picture as if we've got no problems, got no issues. What we're saying, we're not only that. When, you know, I remember when, you know, COVID issues started, and in fact, you know, Melinda Gates, where there will be bodies in the streets, you know, it's going to decimate this continent. It didn't then, it couldn't believe it then, and it still hasn't. Yes, COVID is a problem, but it isn't the problem the West thought it would be, because we don't have health systems, we don't, you know, you know, they had so believed the narrative that they started predicting what the future is based on a stereotypical old-fashioned narrative. And that's exactly what we're trying to fight. So COVID has kind of, in a way, proved that the narrative is perception, you know? So in a way, you know, the COVID has done well for the continent, because it hasn't, you know, all the things that people believed would happen, we haven't, you know, I just remember, you know, Melinda saying there'll be bodies in the street. And at one point I thought, oh my God, there'll be bodies in the street. But I was sitting on the continent, there weren't bodies on the street. And actually, it was pretty much, you know, we haven't had the same death rates for a lot of reasons, and scientists don't really know why. So yeah, anyway, let me just leave it there.
Right. And I think what something very interesting that you picked up on is this digitality. I mean, we're living in a more digitalized space now because of COVID. And, you know, people can talk back or speak back, they can tweet, they can have these conversations. However, you know, there is still these issues that we have with the digital divide. You know, some people don't have access to the internet. And during this time, it's becoming more and more pronounced that, you know, there are people who have access to information and some people don't, by virtue of not having the digital skills or the tools. I'd be interested to know, in each of your communities, how you are overcoming that and how you are packaging information. How are people having access to this information, and how are they able to engage with it, especially during this time?
Well, here in Australia, for example, like and this also partially goes to the previous question as well. We've been extremely lucky that we've had very limited cases in comparison to other parts of the world. Like there was a couple of stories just a few days ago over here showing that, like some counties in the United States, for example, and some small regions in Europe have had like massively more like cases than what Australia's had. And part of that's been due to the fact that like that we do have like quite a strong quarantine system here in Australia. So that shielded us from the strongest parts of the pandemic nearly a year ago. But it's also like, again, like highlighted quite a lot of the issues of inequality here in Australia as well in regards to the digital divide. So that's an area that like the states here in Australia have been focusing on more so than the federal government per se, because there's a split between like different levels of responsibility. So we're getting back to a somewhat like a normal like situation over here, like a COVID-19 normal per se. However, like that I think also has like had its own lessons to be learned as well, because like if somebody doesn't have like access to a computer, or like let's say you've got like a family and there's 4 or 5 siblings, like who has like the computer like at any given time throughout the day. So there's been different like pressures like that put forward for us here, but like at the same time, I think that it's also like made a lot of communities come together in ways that like we never thought were really possible. Like I think that in terms of digital uptake, we've probably gone further in the past year than what we probably otherwise would have been, like if there hadn't have been a pandemic. Like we're probably about 10 years ahead in terms of like digital uptake for meetings, for education, and I think that we're not going to go back to the previous system.
I'll just jump in there because that's a very interesting point that you're making about access and who has the access. Rebecca, what would you say has been your experience in your community? Is it a similar situation where people might have access to one piece of equipment and, you know, that's limiting their access to information across a household or a community per se?
Yeah, absolutely. I think here in the US, you know, there are still indigenous communities that may not necessarily have access to broadband. And it's kind of, you know, that issue I think has bubbled to the surface as something, you know, that's super important. And, you know, no matter if it's where to get vaccinated or when, you know, the vaccine becomes available, like whatever important piece of information that is, like you need internet access, even if it's just on your mobile phone, to be able to access that, you know, as someone that's living in the pandemic. So I think that that issue has been especially important. And I was saying, I think you may have dropped off a little bit earlier when I was talking about, you know, how NAJA, we've kind of shifted our strategy from you know, our national conference, obviously not having in-person gatherings, but one of the things we wanted to do was offer, you know, webinars, and we offer them for free so anyone can access them anytime. So even if there, you know, is a reporter, like in one of our sessions, who does work on the Navajo Nation, Donovan Quintero, I think he was dialing in from his car so he could get you know, internet access. And so, you know, that's a real challenge of access to, you know, internet on the res. So, and it's like that, you know, and like I said, various places throughout the US that continues to be an issue. But I think it's an added, you know, struggle that we don't necessarily like think about for everyone that's reporting on these issues, is, you know, having access to broadband everywhere, you know, throughout Indian country. So it is an added challenge to that. But again, like I said, we're trying to do our part to make sure that we're, you know, still providing those access to our members whenever they do have, you know, they are able to tune in whenever and make those trainings for them when they're covering Indian country available to them, you know, anytime that they're able to log on and get those, you know, for free. You don't even have to be a member of NAJA to access our webinar series on covering COVID in Indian country, because we wanted to make sure that those got into, you know, as many hands as possible. And to Moky, I feel like there's so many. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Can I just jump in here with some insights from Moky as well about this. I'm just aware of our time, so I'm just trying to get in as much as we can before we come to the end of our time.
I mean, just very quickly, I mean, I will say, obviously, you know, data and access to data is an issue, but there have been pros to the fact that we haven't been able to meet in person because a lot of these conferences, you physically travel there. Now you're able to pull things together and people dialing in from all over the continent. And I think that's worked better. And I think we were probably the last, continent that would be quite happy with this, let's do it by webinar. We want to meet in person. Africans, we like to shake hands, and and all of that we can't do now. So I think the pro side is that we've been forced to kind of leapfrog our thinking and to make sort of meeting digitally acceptable. On the downside is that there are people who can't. However, there are, certainly for education and things, government had forced some of the, when I say forced, the service providers have zero-rated data access for certain segments of society. So for education, you can get access for free. But again, I guess there are costs to everything, and I think this is going to force government to realize that a lot of mobile network operators are making huge amounts of money while they're pushing a lot of people out of the economy, out of access to information. I think this is an opportunity for governments to look at that on the continent.
Mm-hmm. And so now, I mean, in terms of the narratives and packaging these narratives and how they get access to, how we get access to the mainstream space, is it necessary? Is it important for these conversations to be happening in mainstream spaces, or is it important that they just remain niche? Because I think there is this conversation between, do we have to constantly speak back to a narrative, a dominant narrative, or can we just speak within our own narratives and that's enough? I'm hearing quite a lot about, there's some niche kind of content that stays within the community, and then there's some that's more about challenging a dominant narrative or speaking back to a dominant narrative in some sort of ways. Do you feel that there is a need constantly to speak back to a narrative that's dominant, or sometimes that's not a necessary thing? Just to speak within your space and community is enough?
Can I start with that?
Yeah.
Because that's what African New Filter was set up to do, is to speak to the dominant narrative. Because I think there's enough people, there's a groundswell of people who object to, who find that there's an impact to that stereotypical, harmful narrative. But yet, as Africans, we're talking amongst ourselves constantly. And that doesn't do anything to shift the narratives. And right now, it is global. Somebody in America says something and we hear it over here, or it has impact over here. And also, don't forget, there's a lot of diasporans. There's a lot of Africans in America who still suffer from the impact of that narrative, because people think, oh, you're African, therefore you must be a little bit unintelligent, probably don't have much agency. And just to give you one quick example is that, at the beginning of COVID, there was a story that broke in the news about how African immigrants in China were being treated when when COVID started. The fact was that this thing started in China, yet they were throwing Africans out of their accommodation. Like, landlords were not renewing them. They weren't being let into shops. They were being left on the streets because Chinese people believe the narrative about Africans. So there are real life implications to just saying, hey, let's not do anything about it. Doesn't affect us. It does. Negative narratives have an impact. And as wishy-washy and willy-nilly as it potentially is, it's just narrative. It really does. It's important for us to tackle it, to be seen, to be even just showing people. And it's not just foreigners or Western news services, it's actually Africans ourselves. We inadvertently feed the narrative constantly when we tell our stories, when we complain about this, when we always say, so we also have to kind of just, self-limit and just realize, oh, hold on, it's not always others, it's sometimes us.
Right. And maybe I'll just jump in there, Kate, with an insight about trans rights, because there's an essay that you had shared with me about, the J.K. Rowling scandal of last year, and, these very harmful statements that she made about trans rights and trans people, how you speak back to people with that kind of power within society. Can you speak back, and how do you do that? Or do you just speak within community and counter those narratives within safe spaces. What's your take on that?
I think that we can and we have to speak up in regards to any form of inequality that's going on anywhere, and that's whether it be like in relation to trans people such as myself, or like any form of like racial or religious like persecution. And it shouldn't matter like what like level of wealth like somebody has, uh, like each and every one of us should be treated with the same level of like um, of, of, of dignity, of human respect and compassion. And I I think that this is an opportunity, like with J.K. Rowling, for example, for each and every one of us to learn more about like our fellow human beings, and to strive to do better. And I mean that for me like is like challenged me to like learn a lot more about the people around me, um, to say thank you more, to show gratitude, um, to reach out to people and say, hey, are you doing okay? So while J.K. Rowling um, with her remarks, like it has been disappointing, I've also viewed it as an opportunity. And I think that the more that we focus on like our similarities, like the better it will be long term for us as a planet as well, because there's more that unites us than what divides us. And the the level of hatred that I've seen at different times, like, has been so heartbreaking. Like Moky, like with what you just referenced in regards to how different people from various different parts of Africa, like, were treated, like in China. That was actually a headline story here in Australia, like with how like people were being made homeless because we could see what was going on, and because like we'd been able to limit like the community exposure to COVID-19, like we were looking heavily at like how different parts of the world were covering COVID-19, how other societies and um, national communities were examining different things as well. So it was heartbreaking, and that was one of the key reasons why, like we've been looking at like all the other different like nations in the Indian Pacific region. To help out, to like if there's different resources that like the different countries need in order to be able to report on COVID-19, like different like organizations such as the ABC, for example, they've been including that in national broadcasts.
Okay, if that's okay.
Yeah.
And I very interesting thing that you said about how you connect communities across a cause. It just got me thinking a little bit about America and the context of America with Black Lives Matter last year, and if there was any kind of intersection as well there between having, I mean, Black Lives Matter then sparked off a whole global conversation about race and about minorities and rights and issues that happened there. Was there anything that you could pick up from that had a cross interest with Indigenous rights in America, Rebecca?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think, our Indigenous communities have, been huge supporters of the Black Lives Matter movement because, again, when we're elevating people of color, that's all of us, no matter what we look like. I mean, it's helpful to Indigenous communities, it's helpful to Black communities. And I think that work of educating, white publics is all of our work that we're undertaking. And so many of the things that Moky was talking about, in her work, I think that there are so many similarities. And the question that you asked earlier, Fungai, about, is it, can it be our responsibility to push back against a mainstream narrative? And I absolutely see that as, our responsibility, to make sure that we are, supporting ethical coverage of Indian country and indigenous communities. The same goes for, Black communities within the U.S. But yeah, I absolutely think it's not just responsibility. And one of the reasons that we were founded as an organization to push back against that. So when we see these, egregious headlines, we are the group that is, speaking against those and saying why they are stereotypes, they are harmful to indigenous communities. And then, also at the same time, the other thing that we're dealing with here is, invisibility in the dominant narrative to some degree too. So, it's like we only get a very small sliver of the, coverage in mainstream. And so when we get that, coverage, it needs to be ethically reported coverage. And if it's not, then I feel like that's kind of one of our roles as a watchdog, as an organization, to call that out when we see it, when we see those stereotypes, and that's what's being leaned on for reporting, and there is lacking in context, then we have to call that out for sure. So, but yeah, I just wanted to kind of go back to that point. But yes, thanks for making that point too.
Okay, thank you. We're running out of time now. I'll just give you all 1 minute, and I will stop you, unfortunately, because we are running out of time. 1 minute for any final remarks, and then we'll close up. Kate, you can go ahead.
Okay, I think that COVID-19 and also Black Lives Matter have had an immeasurable impact on the global media as well, because it's forcing each and every one of us to learn. And that's also had a major impact here in Australia as well, because we've had issues with Indigenous incarceration rates and also Indigenous coverage as well, which is one of the key things that we've been working on Viacom CBS. We've recently just started a new series of scholarships for Indigenous students as well. So we are working as much as what we can to bring as much diversity and inclusion, true diversity and inclusion, to everything that we do. And just in regards to,
unfortunately, sorry, I'm very sorry, we're running out of time. Moky, your 1 minute.
My 1 minute is that I guess I'll say is that narrative does matter. I think it's important that people are telling stories, but we throw that out. You must tell your story, but we have to be careful how we're framing the stories. And it's not just something I'm aiming at a foreign audience talking about Africa. I'm talking about Africans ourselves. So it's just more conscious about the story, the narrative we're feeding when we are telling our stories, and then the narratives that we're responding to, the narratives that the outsiders tell about us.
Thank you, Moky. Rebecca?
Sure. And Kate touched on scholarships, and I wanted to just point out in my last minute that we do have resources at naja.com, which is our website for the Native American Journalists Association. We have several fellowships and scholarships for Native journalists, Indigenous journalists that are covering Indian country. And I would love for everyone to get their hands on resources for mainstream and tribal media and those pieces of support for our up and comers as well too. But it's been a pleasure to join you all.
Thank you so much for joining this panel. It's been enlightening. It was just scraping at the surface. There's so much more that we could have discussed, and I hope these conversations will continue. Thank you for making the time across these time zones. And yeah, all the best with your work, and please continue to speak up. It's so important.